What if the very foundation of life on Earth, the oceans, simply vanished overnight? Not dried up slowly, over millennia, but poof, gone. Imagine waking up to an Earth stripped bare, its vast blue expanses replaced by gaping, desolate chasms. It sounds like a ridiculous premise for a disaster movie, something so utterly absurd that it belongs solely in the realm of science fiction. We dismiss it instantly, a fleeting, impossible thought. But what if the reason we rarely consider it, or dismiss it so quickly, isn't because it's truly impossible, but because the implications are far too unsettling to confront? What if discussing such a scenario, even hypothetically, reveals vulnerabilities we're not meant to see, truths about our planet and our existence that are deliberately obscured? We are constantly told that the oceans are vast, eternal, a constant presence that has shaped our world for billions of years. They cover over 70% of our planet's surface, hold 97% of its water, and regulate everything from climate to the air we breathe. They are the cradle of life, the engine of weather, the silent, omnipresent force that defines Earth. But what would truly happen if that constant, that colossal, life-giving force was suddenly removed? What would the world look like? What would become of us? And why does exploring such a profound what if feel almost taboo, as if merely uttering the words could conjure a forbidden reality? This isn't about a natural disaster, a meteor strike, or a supervolcano. This is about peeling back layers of assumed stability, questioning the very bedrock of our understanding of Earth. It's about asking uncomfortable questions about our planet, our societies, and our very existence in a way that challenges the conventional narrative. The thought of the oceans disappearing isn't just a physical catastrophe, it's an intellectual one, forcing us to reevaluate every single assumption we hold dear. This isn't a mainstream scientific thought experiment you'd find in a peer-reviewed journal. Oh no. This idea, this unsettling hypothesis, often emerges from the fringe. It's born in the deeper corners of the internet, in forums and debates where individuals dare to question fundamental assumptions about planetary stability and human resilience. It's whispered in circles that challenge the official narratives, the comfortable explanations, and the carefully curated understanding of our world. Why is this concept so often met with immediate dismissal, scorn, or even outright mockery? Is it truly scientifically unsound, a fantasy utterly devoid of any basis in reality? Or does it challenge a comfortable narrative of human control, predictability, and safety too profoundly? Perhaps it's a mirror reflecting our deepest, unspoken fears about the fragility of our existence, a fear so potent that we instinctively lash out at any suggestion of its possibility. The idea feels exaggerated, almost childishly simplistic, doesn't it? What if the water just went away? It sounds like a child's question, a naive thought experiment. But sometimes the most profound vulnerabilities are hidden behind the simplest, most direct questions. These are the questions that official discourse avoids, the ones that pierce through layers of complexity and expose a raw, terrifying truth. The very act of imagining such a scenario forces us to confront the fragility of systems we take for granted, from global climate patterns to international commerce, from the stability of tectonic plates to the delicate balance of life itself. The unspoken fear isn't just of the absence of water, it's of the absolute systemic collapse of everything we know. The unspoken fear isn't just of the absence of water, it's of the absolute systemic collapse of everything we know. This isn't a mainstream scientific thought experiment you'd find in a peer-reviewed journal. Oh no. This idea, this unsettling hypothesis, often emerges from the fringe. It's born in the deeper corners of the internet, in forums and debates where individuals dare to question fundamental assumptions about planetary stability and human resilience. It's whispered in circles that challenge the official narratives, the comfortable explanations, and the carefully curated understanding of our world. Why is this concept so often met with immediate dismissal, scorn, or even outright mockery? Is it truly scientifically unsound, a fantasy utterly devoid of any basis in reality? Or does it challenge a comfortable narrative of human control, predictability, and safety too profoundly? Perhaps it's a mirror reflecting our deepest, unspoken fears about the fragility of our existence, a fear so potent that we instinctively lash out at any suggestion of its possibility. The very mention of oceans vanishing can trigger an almost visceral rejection, a need to immediately categorize it as absurd, as a children's fantasy. This reaction itself is telling. It suggests not just scientific disagreement, but a psychological defense mechanism against an idea too disruptive to entertain. The idea feels exaggerated, almost childishly simplistic, doesn't it? What if the water just went away? It sounds like a child's question, a naive thought experiment. But sometimes, the most profound vulnerabilities are hidden behind the simplest, most direct questions. These are the questions that official discourse avoids, the ones that pierce through layers of complexity and expose a raw, terrifying truth. The very act of imagining such a scenario forces us to confront the fragility of systems we take for granted. From global climate patterns to international commerce, from the stability of tectonic plates to the delicate balance of life itself. The unspoken fear isn't just of the absence of water, it's of the absolute systemic collapse of everything we know. It's a fear that, once acknowledged, might force us to question the very foundations of our perceived security. This isn't to say that mainstream science is deliberately hiding something, but rather that the sheer scale of the what if makes it a less practical area of study for traditional funding and research. Imagine proposing a multi-million-dollar grant application to study the effects of oceans disappearing. It would likely be met with laughter. Yet it's precisely in these absurd scenarios that we might uncover critical blind spots in our understanding. The dismissal often comes from a place of intellectual comfort, a preference for studying phenomena within established paradigms rather than venturing into the truly unknown and unsettling. Moreover, the exaggerated label serves a purpose. It allows us to compartmentalize such ideas, to file them away under science fiction and ignore their deeper implications. But what if the very act of labeling it as exaggerated prevents us from seeing subtle indicators, potential mechanisms, or even just the extreme fragility of our current planetary equilibrium? Sometimes, the most profound vulnerabilities are hidden behind the simplest, most direct questions that official discourse avoids. These are the questions that pierce through layers of complexity and expose a raw, terrifying truth. The unspoken fear isn't just of the absence of water, it's of the absolute, systemic collapse of everything we know. It's the fear of a world where all the interconnected systems, ecological, social, economic, political, unravel simultaneously. It's the fear that our carefully constructed reality, our sense of control over nature, is an illusion. This fear is so fundamental that it often manifests as ridicule, a way to diffuse the unsettling power of the idea. We laugh at it because the alternative, truly contemplating it, is too terrifying. It's a defense mechanism, a collective coping strategy against a truth too raw, too devastating, to face head-on. If the oceans could disappear, what else could? What other assumed constants might prove to be fleeting? This radical uncertainty is what truly unsettles, and why this idea, despite its outlandish premise, continues to haunt the fringes of our collective imagination. But for the oceans to truly vanish, what fundamental laws of physics and geology would have to break? Or, more disturbingly, what existing conditions or latent potentials are we simply not being told about? Mainstream science, in its effort to communicate complex planetary systems to a broad public, often simplifies these realities. And in that simplification, where do these potentially critical, unsettling possibilities get left out? We assume, for instance, that the Earth's water cycles are immutable, that the planet's geological processes unfold over eons, slow and predictably. But what if these assumptions are built on an incomplete understanding, or worse, a subtly controlled narrative designed to maintain a sense of order and security? Consider the sheer volume and weight of the oceans. They cover approximately 71% of the Earth's surface and contain about 35 billion cubic kilometers of water. That's an immense mass exerting colossal pressure on the ocean floor and influencing everything from plate tectonics to the planet's rotational dynamics. For this vast entity to disappear, it wouldn't just be a matter of evaporation. Evaporation, even at an accelerated rate, would flood the atmosphere, leading to a runaway greenhouse effect and a radically different, but still water-present, planet. No. For a true disappearance, we're talking about something far more profound, something that would challenge our most basic understanding of Earth's internal structure and its interaction with the cosmos. Could there be unknown geological or even astrophysical mechanisms that, under specific rare conditions, could facilitate such a rapid disappearance? What if the impossibility of this scenario is merely a reflection of our current lack of public knowledge? A gap in what we are permitted to understand about our own planet's deeper workings. Imagine for a moment a geological process so extreme, so rapid that it could somehow absorb or sequester the entirety of the Earth's surface water into the mantle. Scientific models currently suggest that the mantle can hold significant amounts of water, but largely in hydrous minerals and at a slow geological pace. What if there are undiscovered pathways, massive conduits, or sudden phase transitions that could accelerate this process dramatically? Or perhaps the truth lies not within Earth, but beyond it. Could an unprecedented astrophysical event, an interaction with an unknown celestial body, or the sudden activation of some dormant cosmic force somehow strip Earth of its most vital fluid? These are the kinds of questions that sound like science fiction, yet they force us to confront the limits of our accepted scientific paradigms. The very idea suggests that our planet might be far more dynamic, far more volatile, and far less understood than the conventional reassuring narratives suggest. The unquestioned premises we hold dear, the stability of our planet, the predictability of its cycles, are often presented as irrefutable facts. Yet, history is replete with scientific truths that were later overturned by new discoveries. What if our current models of planetary hydrology and geology are simply missing a crucial variable, a hidden mechanism that, once triggered, could rewrite the rules? This isn't about conspiracy theories, but about the inherent limitations of human knowledge and the possibility that the most profound truths might lie just beyond the edge of our current perception, deliberately obscured by the sheer comfort of what we think we know. The impossibility might not be an inherent property of the event itself, but rather a reflection of the boundaries of our accepted scientific discourse. The immediate thought of oceans vanishing conjures images of parched land and universal thirst, an obvious, devastating consequence. Yet the implications stretch far beyond the visible absence of water. The systemic consequences would be so profound, so utterly transformative, that they would dwarf any climate crisis humanity has ever contemplated. We're talking about a planetary re-engineering on a scale that defies imagination, triggering a cascade of secondary effects that almost nobody mentions, because they are simply too terrifying to confront. Consider the immense pressure relief on the ocean floor. Billions of cubic kilometers of water exert an unimaginable force, shaping the very crust beneath. If this pressure were suddenly removed, the geological repercussions would be catastrophic. We'd witness unprecedented seismic activity, tsunamis of exposed Earth, and the rapid uplift of vast, previously submerged land masses. Fault lines, currently held in check by the ocean's weight, would rupture with devastating force, unleashing earthquakes orders of magnitude greater than anything recorded in human history. The exposure of vast, unknown geological structures, many of which have been hidden for eons, would reveal a new, volatile topography, a raw and unstable planet reshaped in an instant. Beyond geology, the atmospheric changes would be equally cataclysmic. The oceans are the Earth's primary heat sink and carbon pump. Without them, global temperatures would skyrocket, not just from the absence of water's moderating effect, but from the sudden release of dissolved gases previously contained within the colossal liquid mass. The atmospheric pressure itself would shift dramatically, leading to hurricane-force winds on a global scale as air masses rush to fill the new thermal and pressure vacuums. The Earth's rotation and even its subtle orbital dynamics would be altered by the sudden redistribution of such an enormous mass, potentially leading to unpredictable wobbles and further destabilizing our planet's delicate cosmic balance. These ignored side effects are not mere scientific curiosities. They represent a fundamental unwinding of Earth's current operating system, but the consequences extend beyond the purely physical. In a world where oceans disappeared, what new, desperate incentives would emerge for control over the remaining freshwater, the exposed land, or even the atmosphere? This isn't just about survival. It's about power. The ultimate scarcity would breed the ultimate competition. Who would benefit from such a scenario? Perhaps those who already control landlocked resources, those with advanced atmospheric manipulation technologies, or those who have been quietly preparing for the ultimate collapse of civilization. Human, political, and institutional reactions would be a study in chaos and ruthless pragmatism. Forget international law, it would collapse instantly. The very concept of national sovereignty would become meaningless in the face of such an existential threat. Governments, if they survived, would transform into desperate authoritarian entities focused solely on securing dwindling resources for their populations, or what remained of them. New forms of control would be imposed, driven by the absolute necessity of survival, but quickly morphing into instruments of unprecedented power consolidation. The scramble for fresh water, now the most precious commodity, would ignite conflicts on an unimaginable scale. Exposed ocean floors, potentially rich in mineral deposits previously inaccessible, would become the new battlegrounds. The very air we breathe, now a volatile mix, would be a resource to be managed, perhaps even owned. This ultimate scarcity would create perverse incentives for those in power, turning a planetary tragedy into an opportunity for unparalleled dominance. The question isn't just, how do we survive? But who gets to decide who survives and under what conditions? The answer would likely be brutal, swift, and dictated by the cold calculus of ultimate power. The disappearance of oceans wouldn't just be an environmental catastrophe, it would immediately become the ultimate political weapon, or prize. Imagine the world leaders, or what remained of them, grappling with a landscape utterly alien, devoid of its defining feature. The initial shock would give way to a ruthless assessment of who controlled what. The nations with existing freshwater reserves, those with arable land that could still be irrigated, or those with the technological capacity to harness atmospheric moisture or deep underground aquifers would suddenly hold unprecedented leverage. This isn't just about resource control. It's about the control of humanity's very existence. The narrative surrounding such an event would be paramount. Who would craft the official explanation? Would it be presented as an unavoidable natural phenomenon, a cosmic accident, or perhaps a consequence of human hubris? The truth, if it were ever known, would likely be suppressed, twisted, or buried under layers of manufactured consent. Governments, or the powerful entities that replace them, would exert absolute control over information, shaping public perception to prevent panic, or more likely to justify their own consolidation of power. Any lingering notions of transparency or democratic accountability would vanish, replaced by a desperate need for order, however draconian. Economically, the world would be utterly remade. The global economy, currently built on intricate supply chains, international trade, and marine transport, would crumble instantly. But from the ashes, new industries would rise, driven by the new scarcity. Desalination, previously a niche technology, would become the paramount engineering challenge, demanding energy and resources on an unimaginable scale. Mining operations on the newly exposed ocean floor, revealing mineral deposits previously unreachable, would spark a new gold rush, but one fought with far greater desperation and stakes. Imagine nations, or powerful corporations, claiming vast swathes of seabed, not just for minerals but for strategic control of the new landmass. The benefits of these new ventures would not be equitably distributed. They would flow directly to those who managed to seize and exploit them first, further entrenching power disparities. Existing global institutions, designed for a world with oceans and predictable climate patterns, would either collapse entirely or transform into unprecedented instruments of control. The United Nations, the World Bank, international treaties, all would become relics of a bygone era. In their place, new, more centralized, and authoritarian structures would emerge. The very definition of sovereignty would become meaningless as nations struggled for basic survival. Borders would blur not through peaceful integration, but through expansionist wars for water, land, and breathable air. The new global order would be defined not by cooperation, but by a brutal hierarchy of access to dwindling resources. The systemic escalation would not be gradual. It would be instantaneous and cascading. The initial physical shock would trigger societal collapse, leading to political upheaval, and then a desperate, zero-sum economic struggle. Every decision, every action, would be viewed through the lens of survival and resource acquisition. The ethical frameworks that underpin human society would be stretched to their breaking point, perhaps even discarded entirely. The question wouldn't be what is right, but what is necessary, and in a world without oceans, necessary would often mean brutal, selfish, and utterly devoid of compassion. The raw, primal instincts of humanity would come to the forefront, unconstrained by the niceties of civilization. The ultimate scarcity would truly define the ultimate competition. From curiosity to catastrophe, this is the moment the what if ceases to be a mere thought experiment and transforms into a terrifying, plausible threat. We've explored the implications, the systemic breakdowns, the sheer scale of the devastation. But what are the subtle indicators, the scientific anomalies, the ignored data points that suggest such an event, however remote, is not entirely outside the realm of possibility? It's easy to dismiss this as science fiction, a hyperbolic scenario for a summer blockbuster. Yet, the very act of dismissal often masks a deeper unease, a subconscious recognition of vulnerability. Consider for a moment the sheer volume of scientific papers, often published in obscure journals, that hint at planetary processes we barely understand. We're taught about plate tectonics and the water cycle as immutable, slow-moving forces. But what if there are mechanisms, geological or even extraterrestrial, that could accelerate these processes to an unthinkable degree? Are there anomalies in deep-sea seismic activity, unexplained shifts in the Earth's magnetic field, or peculiar gravitational fluctuations that are observed, recorded, but then categorized as statistical noise, too inconvenient or too alarming to integrate into the prevailing scientific narrative? The ignored danger isn't necessarily a smoking gun, but rather a collection of disparate data points that, when viewed through a different lens, begin to form an unsettling pattern. Think about the unexplained disappearances of ships and planes in certain oceanic regions, often attributed to human error or freak weather. What if these are not isolated incidents, but symptoms of localized, albeit temporary, disruptions in the very fabric of the ocean's presence? Or consider the vast unexplored regions of the deep ocean, where hydrothermal vents spew superheated water and exotic life thrives under immense pressure. We assume these are stable ecosystems, but what if these vents are connected to subterranean systems of unimaginable scale, capable of rapidly altering the ocean's chemistry or even its physical state under specific rare conditions? What if the mechanisms for such an event are already in motion or have been observed, but are deemed too catastrophic to reveal to the public? History is replete with examples of inconvenient truths being suppressed for the sake of public order or political stability. Imagine a scientific body discovering a slow, inexorable process that, over centuries or even decades, could lead to a significant loss of oceanic mass. Would that information be immediately disseminated, triggering global panic? Or would it be carefully managed, studied in secret, while world leaders grapple with an impossible dilemma? The potential for societal collapse, the economic fallout, the sheer existential dread. These are powerful incentives for silence. This scenario exposes the ultimate fragility of our planetary systems and the undeniable hubris of human civilization. We build our societies on the assumption of environmental constants, predictable seasons, stable sea levels, and the unending abundance of water. But this thought experiment forces us to confront the thin veil of stability that holds everything together. It's not just about water, it's about the intricate, delicate balance of forces, gravitational, geological, atmospheric, that allows life as we know it to flourish. Remove one critical component and the entire edifice crumbles. The unthinkable threshold is the point at which the hypothesis moves from theoretical to a clear and present danger. It's when the subtle anomalies coalesce into undeniable evidence, when the ignored data becomes impossible to overlook. It demands immediate, radical, and perhaps impossible action. What would that action even look like? Could we, as a species, collectively mobilize to prevent such a catastrophe, or would we succumb to infighting, denial, and despair? The very prospect is paralyzing, yet it's precisely why we must consider it. Because understanding our ultimate vulnerabilities is the first step, however terrifying, toward true resilience. In such an apocalyptic scenario where the oceans have vanished, who could possibly win? The very notion seems grotesque, a cruel joke played on the remnants of humanity. Yet even in the deepest despair, power dynamics persist. Perhaps the winners would be those who already control vast landlocked freshwater resources, or those with advanced atmospheric manipulation technologies capable of extracting what little moisture remains from the air. Consider the nations with extensive underground aquifers, long dismissed as secondary to oceanic trade routes. Suddenly, their barren lands become the most coveted territories on Earth. Or imagine corporations that invested heavily in extreme climate-resilient agriculture, developing techniques to grow food in arid saline conditions. Their foresight, once mocked, now becomes humanity's last hope, granting them unimaginable leverage. It's also plausible that those who have prepared for the ultimate collapse of civilization, often derided as doomsday preppers or fringe survivalists, might find themselves in a position of unexpected advantage. Their fortified bunkers, their stored supplies, their knowledge of self-sufficiency all become invaluable. But even their win would be a hollow victory, a survival amidst desolation, haunted by the ghosts of a lost world. The true victors might be those shadowy entities, the ones who perhaps knew of this impending disaster all along and quietly amassed resources, technologies, and influence, positioning themselves to rebuild the world in their own image from the ashes. Their victory would be born of secrecy and exploitation, a chilling testament to human opportunism, even in the face of oblivion. The losers, however, are far easier to identify. The vast majority of humanity, undoubtedly. The entire global ecosystem, irreparably broken. But more specifically, coastal nations would be utterly annihilated, their cities reduced to skeletal monuments on a parched, saline plain. Maritime industries, once the lifeblood of global trade and sustenance, would simply cease to exist. Fishing fleets rusting on elevated seabeds, cargo ships stranded miles from any discernible water, their purpose lost. Any society reliant on predictable climate patterns, which is to say almost every society on Earth, would face immediate and catastrophic collapse. Agriculture would fail, economies would shatter, and the delicate social contracts that bind communities would unravel under the relentless pressure of thirst and starvation. The cultural loss, the obliteration of coastal traditions, the disappearance of marine biodiversity. These are losses beyond measure, scars that would forever mark the Earth and any surviving memory of its past. And what of the unconsulted risk-takers? The global populace, who are often kept in the dark about fundamental planetary risks, would bear the brunt of this catastrophe without ever having been consulted or even informed about the possibility. We live our lives assuming the permanence of the oceans, trusting that the systems supporting us are stable. The idea that such a fundamental element could vanish is so far outside our collective consciousness that it's never even considered for public debate or preparedness. This lack of transparency, this deliberate or accidental omission of extreme eventualities from public discourse, represents a profound betrayal. The cost of such an event is immeasurable, a debt owed by a silent few to the suffering many. The unpaid bill for such a cataclysm is truly staggering. Who would be left to pay it? The answer is likely no one, because the very concept of accountability, of debt, of recompense would have long since dissolved along with the oceans themselves. In a world struggling for mere survival, the niceties of financial or moral obligation would be utterly meaningless. This is precisely why such a topic might never be truly advanced in public discourse. It reveals a devastating, unpayable debt, a vulnerability so profound it threatens the very fabric of our perceived stability. It forces us to confront the terrifying reality that some debts are simply too large to ever be settled, leaving only silence and dust in their wake. The disappearance of the oceans, therefore, is not just an ecological disaster. It is the ultimate indictment of a species that failed to ask the right questions, or perhaps refused to listen to the answers.